Do you ever wonder about how all of this started? Not to ask the question of why is there something rather than nothing, but the fact that the most simplistic building blocks can give rise to infinite complexity. As our history has gone on, we have gotten closer to that answer. Our creation story has evolved. From believing in Adam and Eve or Pangu in Nuwa, we now have evidence of cosmic background radiation and the ever-expanding space around us. During the Big Bang, when quarks and leptons came into existence, 13 billion years later, thinking beings would then be able to debate what our reality's creation story really is. But now we have hit a wall. What caused the Big Bang to occur? What was that switch that flipped to give rise to everything we see before us? If the scientific method has taught me anything, it's that the repeated phenomenon should be taken seriously, and probability is your best chance at understanding deep truths. This quality of probability is exactly what makes simulation theory so viable. Simulation theory has become a highly debated topic in the last decade, thanks to humanity's rise in the use of digital computation, and it now being a part of our daily lives. We've begun to question the implication of having this power constantly around us. How is this changing us? What perspective are we gaining? And what are we really building? It's one of those ideas that had completely wrecked my brain when I had first started to realize its possibilities. Not in terms of figuring out if it's possible, but really understanding those implications. What really pulls the strings of our reality? Physics is not a field that is finished by any means. We still have many mysteries in our reality's functions that have yet to be solved. For example, what set the fundamental constants of physics? The speed of light in a vacuum, the gravitational constant, the fine structure constant, the Planck constant, the mass of protons, and the mass of electrons. Each of these values never change anywhere in the universe, as if some genius decided to make them global variables in the underlying source code. And what caused our creation event? The Big Bang. Simulation theory has given us a path to these answers. However, currently we don't have any solid way to prove its validity without thought experiments and probabilities. What would be considered the best proof of this would be the ability to leave whatever simulation we are in now and head up a level. Or maybe that level starts to interact with us. When the best proof that anyone is going to get for now is to see how common simulations are, and all we have to do is look down. Tennis for Two was created in 1958 by William Higginbotham at the Brookhaven National Laboratory. It is considered the world's first video game. The game was first shown to the world at the laboratory's annual public exposition, and immediately the most popular exhibit of the entire event. Boiling the game down to its basic mechanics, it's the game that inspired Pong, except instead of a bird's eye view, we see Tennis for Two parallel with the ground. And amazingly, this looks like a much smoother experience than Pong. The game was designed on an analog computer called the Donner Model 30, using an oscilloscope for viewing, which was being used to simulate trajectories with wind resistance. And this is why the machine is able to render out brilliantly smooth angles for higher or lower aim shots. Higginbotham had designed two small aluminum controllers. Pressing the button would hit the ball, while turning the knob would change the angle of each shot. In 1959, the following year after its debut, the game was shown again at the next public exposition and recreated to simulate different levels of gravity modeled after Jupiter or the Moon. The idea of simulating or gamifying small aspects of real-world physics was the basis of most of the first video games being developed. The next recorded game developed was Space War, created in 1962 by Stephen Russell, developed on the DEC PD-1 minicomputer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also known as MIT. The game was considered to be a space combat game where two ships, the Needle and the Wedge, would face off against one another, shooting torpedoes. Originally, the game was controlled using the switches on the PD-1, but down the line a pair of gamepads were created. They had two dual-direction switches used to control rotation and thrust, with one button for firing. The movement had a good amount of inertia applied, making the vacuum of space a special combat arena. Aspects of space-time were also simulated. A star was placed in the middle of the arena to give the ability to use its gravity as a gravity assist, to send either of the ships around it to gain speed and change its trajectory. So by 1962, major forces of our reality had already been simulated. Space War's success amongst the programming community in the 1960s had led the game to be widely recreated, which eventually caused the creation of the first arcade cabinet, Galaxy Game. As you can see, Galaxy Game is pretty much a complete recreation of Space War. Exact same presentation, exact same controls. At this time, wireframe vector-based graphics was the standard. Until the release of Tato's Basketball in 1974, sprite-based games had officially hit the arcade, and was only expanded on from there, doubling in scale from 8-bit to 64-bit, leading into 3D. Many people point to a game called Battlezone, released in 1980 by Atari as the first third-dimensional game. Battlezone was a tank battle game which is considered to be the first major 3D success, but isn't the first 3D game developed. Maze War, developed by Stephen Colley and Greg Thompson for the IMLAC PDS-1 computer in 1962, is a very simple vector graphics first-person shooter, where players are dropped into a maze as large eyes for the player characters. The objective being to hunt one another down to see who could shoot the other person first, and thus the first-person genre was born. Of course, later to be popularized by Doom 1993. For a while after the establishment of three-dimensional planes becoming standard, the graphics boom had begun, with games looking to show more complicated 3D visuals, eventually leading to the next innovation: more physics-based interactions. One of the first games to fully incorporate third-dimensional physics-based interactions was Jurassic Park Trespasser, released in 1998 on Windows 98. The game might as well have been the first iteration of Hand Simulator. Throughout the game you control the character Annie, and her right arm, running around to pick up objects using your hand for holding keycards, opening doors, and even shooting firearms. The game's implementation of physical objects to interact with was revolutionary, yet its control scheme and poor optimization was hated by critics at the time and became completely overshadowed when another group came along to give physical interactions another shot. Half-Life 2 released on November 16, 2004 to wide mass market success. The game had incorporated physics-based interactions better than any release before it, having it all be integrally tied to the puzzle solving and combat of the game, while also creating a very well-received story. To some, the game has stood as one of the best games of all time for its ability to make you feel like you have truly stepped into a fully realized world, truly giving the impression that you had gone on some sort of journey. And for a good chunk of time, the game was at the peak of interactive worlds. While the game had great interactive objects, it hadn't started to address environmental interactions, which wouldn't have worked with the game's linear story design. What is probably considered the largest graphical and interactive leap in recent memory was the release of Crysis on November 13, 2007. The level of photorealism and the environment's interactivity was on a whole new level compared to past games. Fully interactive indestructible objects and foliage. Destructible environments. High-quality volumetric lighting. Character models with polygon counts higher than anything that had come before it. Crysis had set a standard in the industry. Running on CryEngine 2 and Microsoft's DirectX 10, Crysis had access to new graphical techniques like volumetric clouds, real-time dynamic lighting and soft shadows, vector motion blur, subsurface scattering, and screen space ambient occlusion, all combining together to help make one hell of a realistic image. Games at their top quality had gone from looking like this to this. And by 2008, the industry had pushed itself forward, trying to meet new expectations. And now, coming into recent years, thanks to the introduction of new tech finally hitting the games industry, tech like photogrammetry, ray tracing, and nanite, the difference between real-world photos and real-time fully simulated scenes is becoming so small, I bet you didn't realize the image on the right is fake. With all new tech coming in, older techniques are no longer needed. High-quality meshes can be produced with photogrammetry that look so real, traditional 3D sculpting is being left behind. You don't need spectre light or bump maps for 2D surfaces if Nanite is able to create the same effect with its polygon per pixel count being 1:1. Soft dynamic shadows and ambient occlusion are a thing of the past if your lighting technology is highly ray-traced, practically simulating real-world light physics. Anti-aliasing isn't needed when the resolution count is reaching higher than 4K because the jagged edges from low pixel counts aren't noticeable. Real-world scenes are becoming easier to create because the physics that create our world are becoming easier to simulate in real time. We are cutting out many of the techniques used to trick the eyes into thinking that they are seeing photorealism, and instead just simulating photorealism. The PDP-1 back in 1959 was considered to have a 200 kHz clock rate, while as of today, a computer built with the AMD Ryzen 7 5800X in 2021 will have a boost clock rate of 4.7 GHz. That is a 2,349,900% increase in speed alone in 62 years. This has never been a question of will we perfectly simulate our reality. It is a question of when.
Well, when we create a simulation, like a game or a movie, it's a distillation of what's interesting about life. You know, like it can take a year to shoot an action movie, and then that's all distilled down into 2 or 3 hours. So let me tell you, if you see an action movie being filmed, it's boring, super boring. There's like lots of takes. Everything's in a green screen. Looks pretty goofy. Doesn't look cool. But once you add the CGI and have great editing, it's amazing. So I think most likely, if we're a simulation, it's really boring outside the simulation. Because why would you make a simulation that's boring? You'd make the simulation way more interesting than base reality.
This idea of simplistically boiling down elements of our lives into game elements has been here from the very start. The first video game ever is just tennis. The second is a 1v1 space combat game. In a short span, we went from recreation of games in our world to creating scenarios that we could not experience without simulations. We have been trying to gamify anything and everything we can think of, from Truck Simulator to a one-to-one recreation of the Milky Way galaxy in Elite Dangerous. When creating a virtual space, our mind does not have a limit. If you can figure out how to code it, you can make it. So what are we really doing with it? The exact same thing we have always been doing from the beginning. Recreating the world and creating experiences that are impossible. The most played games as of March 8, 2021, on Wikipedia's list of most played video games by player count are PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds at 1.037 billion, Crossfire at 1 billion, Dungeon Fighter Online at 700 million, G-Kart at 700 million, then Minecraft at 600 million. You might not have heard of some of these games before. That's because these games are highly popular in the Chinese mobile market. The top 4 are all published by Tencent. Looking at the genres of each game, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds in first place is the Battle Royale of the list. Crossfire is a free-to-play Counter-Strike clone. Dungeon Fighter Online is an MMORPG beat-em-up. G-Kart, the racing game. And best for last, we have Minecraft, the survival game. Each game simulates experiences not easily had, but all simplify their interactions down to single inputs. It's unlikely that most people will experience the intense firefights of Crossfire, while many people will experience Minecraft's survival gameplay loops in real life. Minecraft's design leads it to being one of the best simulations of the human existence for this reason. Our basic survival instincts have all been gamified. Building, farming, fishing, crafting, mining, and exploration. With each branch only getting deeper and more complex as you play, with each major interaction being as effortless as a click of a button. It's no wonder why it's in the top 5 most played games in the world. Outside of Minecraft simulation, it's not easy to do the activities inside of it. It's pretty boring in real life to go fishing. It's quite tedious and dangerous to build a real house. We've spent a good 62 years creating worlds that are full of our imagination. and are effortless for us to interact with. And this process is not going to stop. Like all tools humans have created, we have found great benefit and detriment from them. The dark side to all of this is that some of us have decided that these virtual worlds are better than the ones that they have been born in. They have left behind the reality where their consciousness truly resides. They have spent more time perfecting a virtual life and body than taking care of their own. But that's not to say that our simulations are all bad for us. Thanks to video games, humans have had the chance to place themselves in situations that without the technology, we would never experience. We have been given the chances to grow, challenge, and test ourselves in ways no one in our ancestry could have ever experienced. We have battled gods we will never face. We have built cities that we will never visit. And we have explored ends of deep space no one in our lifetime will ever see. And we have met people so far away from us, our chances at building friendships was almost impossible. Yet thanks to this beautiful technology, some of us have done it. All of it. And that's why we are all the better for it. Simulation theory from our perspective might be impossible to prove, but if it tells us anything, simulations are extremely common and widely used by people all around the world. We have slowly innovated their capability, and if our improvement increases, no matter the rate, we will create a simulation that runs in a way that is indistinguishable from our current reality. 62 years of technological improvement, going from this to this. One day, we are in for one hell of a wake-up call.